All right, let's talk about the story that's literally in your pint glass. We're going to dive into how we went from just a few familiar big name beers on every single shelf to, well, to a world of endless and sometimes overwhelming choice. Let's get into it.
I mean, have you walked down the beer aisle recently? It's just a massive wall of colorful cans, crazy names, and styles you've never even heard of. So, how did this happen? How did we get here? Well, the answer is a wild story about rebellion, revolution, and one single really powerful idea.
And that idea is authenticity. Yep, this one word. It's this commitment to quality above everything else, especially things like profit or growth, that really fueled the entire craft beer movement. You could say it's the secret ingredient that changed everything.
Okay, but first things first. What are we even talking about when we say craft beer? It's a term that gets thrown around all the time, but you might be surprised to learn it has a very specific, official definition. So, according to the Brewers Association, they're kind of the main champions for these smaller breweries. It all boils down to two simple rules. First, they've got to be small. That means they produce 6 million barrels of beer a year or less. And second, they have to be independent. This is key. It means less than 25% of the brewery can be owned or controlled by a giant beverage corporation that isn't, a craft brewer itself.
Now, to understand why these rules matter so much, we have to jump in a time machine. We need to go back to a period you could honestly call the Great Beer Desert. Believe it or not, America once had this incredible, super vibrant beer culture. Back in 1871, there were more than 4,000 breweries operating across the country. Think about that. Almost every town had its own local spot, brewing its own unique beer. It was a golden age of choice. And then it all just fell apart. The beginning of the end was in 1920 with Prohibition. It just completely wiped out thousands of those small, local breweries that couldn't survive. And even when Prohibition finally ended in 1933, the damage was done. The whole landscape was changed forever. And the scale of this collapse is just staggering. From over 4,000 breweries in 1871, by 1970, we were down to just 89. 89 breweries for the entire country. That, my friends, is a beer desert.
So what filled that huge vacuum? Well, you got the lagerization of America. A handful of massive companies took over, and their goal wasn't flavor or variety. It was all about uniformity. They wanted to make one light, consistent, mass-market product that would appeal to absolutely everyone, which, of course, meant it didn't really excite anyone. But, out of all that blandness, a rebellion started brewing. Quite literally, in people's garages and basements. This is how the revolution got its start.
And this right here, this is the moment, the spark. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed a bill that made it legal for Americans to brew their own beer at home for the first time since before Prohibition. And that one single act just unleashed decades of pent-up creativity. All of a sudden, this whole new generation of brewers pops up. And they weren't driven by market share or profits. Nope. They were driven by pure passion. They cared about using quality ingredients. They wanted bold, new, interesting flavors. And they were all about creating something special for their local community, which was a complete rejection of that corporate blandness.
And this wasn't just some weekend hobby, It became a full-blown movement. It was a fight for the soul of beer, and it was all centered on that one key idea, authenticity. This is basically how craft brewers defined themselves. They created what's called an oppositional narrative. It was simple. If big beer was about profit, they were about passion. If big beer was national and corporate, they were local and community-focused. And if big beer was all about making the same thing over and over, they were about constant innovation and variety.
But let's be real, this is a total David versus Goliath story. Even with all their success, just look at the numbers. Two massive corporations still control over 60% of the entire U.S. beer market. These small, independent brewers are fighting for every single tap handle out there. So why did this movement just explode the way it did? Well, it turns out people weren't just thirsty for better-tasting beer, they were thirsty for something more. So let's get personal for a second. Why do we care so much about this stuff? When you choose that hazy IPA from a local brewery over a case of the usual big brand lager, what are you really choosing?
Because the truth is, it's about so much more than just the liquid in the glass, right? You're kind of constructing an identity. You're saying, hey, I'm the kind of person who values quality, who values community. You're choosing to support a small, local business instead of some faceless global corporation.
But of course, the story doesn't end there. As craft beer got bigger and more successful, the battle lines, well, they started to get a little blurry. And this quote just sums it up perfectly. The big corporations realized they couldn't beat the craft movement, so they decided to buy it instead. When Chicago's iconic Goose Island Brewery was sold to Anheuser-Busch in 2011, it sent a massive shockwave through the entire industry.
This sale pretty much kicked off the whole era of crafty beer. These are brands that are designed to look and feel exactly like independent craft breweries. They've got the cool labels, the folksy stories, but they're actually owned by the giants. And the whole point is to cash in on that authenticity trend by, frankly, confusing you.
So, how did the real craft brewers fight back against this? They created the Independent Craft Brewer Seal. You've probably seen it. It's that little upside-down beer bottle on cans and packaging. And it's a super simple visual guarantee that the beer you're holding came from a genuinely small, independent brewery. Which brings us to one final question for the next time you're standing in that beer aisle trying to make a choice. When a brand sells itself to you as authentic, what are you really buying? Is it just a beverage, or is it a belief?